Welcome to the Drum Shuffle, a podcast offering insights, perspectives, and conversations for drummers. I'm your host, Jamie Eads.
Hey, how's it going out there, everybody? Welcome to the Drum Shuffle. Jamie Eads joining you as I do every week. This is episode 62. Hope everybody's having a fantastic week out there. I know I certainly am. Got the computer issues from last week fixed. Got a new 27-inch iMac that I'm rocking through this week. So it's happy days over here at the Drum Shuffle. We have a fantastic episode for you today. I'm going to be joined by my pal and just a super good dude. Kevin Charney is going to be my guest here in just a minute after this message from our sponsor, Cabos Drumsticks. The best kept secret for drummers is finally out. Cabos Drumsticks may look like the sticks you grew up with, but these are not your father's drumsticks. Cabos Drumsticks is Canada's #1 drumstick brand, and they are coming to a retailer near you. With operations in over 28 countries worldwide, thousands of drummers have already discovered the Cabos difference. Using FSC certified wood from Canada and the US, Cabos make the finest quality drumsticks, percussion tools, and accessories on the market. The best news, Cabos Drumsticks offers you a ton of choice. They have 22 individual drumstick models and 14 percussion tools, many of which are available in 3 different wood types: maple, white hickory, and red hickory. Red hickory comes from the center or heart of the hickory tree and has been independently proven to be both stronger and more elastic than white hickory without adding a lot of weight. While most drumstick manufacturers have shunned red hickory, Cabos Drumsticks has embraced it, becoming the only established stick brand in the world to offer a full line of red hickory drumsticks. To learn more about Cabos Drumsticks, visit them online at loscabosdrumsticks.com. Follow them on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, and don't forget to ask for Cabos Drumsticks at your favorite retailer. Dare to be different. Join the Red Hickory Revolution with Cabos Drumsticks. All right, everybody. As I mentioned, I'm going to be joined by my buddy Kevin Charney here in just a moment. Kevin has been out on the road with Jesse Dayton here recently. They just had come back from a tour of Europe when I caught up with Kevin. And he's been recording and touring with Jesse for a while. And Kevin also works for one of the large backline suppliers down in Atlanta that he makes his home. Just doing tons of great work out there. But Kevin has a really unique perspective in that any career that you can have surrounding drums and drumming, he has held that job. He has worked retail, he's worked backline, and of course, he's a great artist. Now, after we did this interview, he also sent me a couple of CDs that I have sitting right here on my desk of his band that he played in several years ago called Soda Jerk. And let me tell you, this is some fantastic music. But Kevin's just a great dude. You would be hard pressed to find a nicer human being than Kevin. And we just had such a good time during this interview. The laughs were coming fast and furiously. So I know that you guys are going to enjoy hearing this. And I can't thank Kevin enough for coming on the show. So help me welcome to the Drum Shuffle, the great Kevin Charney. Hey, good evening, Kevin. How's it going, brother?
It's going great, man. How's it going with you?
I cannot complain at all. Hey, man, thanks for taking time to come on the Drum Shuffle. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'm a big fan. I listen to it on the road.
Oh, man, that's awesome. I love hearing that.
You can blame our mutual friend Josh Touchin for that.
Oh, my gosh. Josh Touchin. Man, I cannot get away from that guy. He's like a devil.
He's ever present.
He is indeed. He's
always lurking in the background somewhere.
That's right. But we love Josh, man. He's done so much cool stuff for this show and for me personally. So, but it's great to finally connect with you. I know you just got back from, about a month or so in Europe?
I spent a week on a cruise ship and went directly literally the day we docked, I got on a plane and flew to Europe for 4 weeks. So it was a long one.
Yeah, for sure. Now, was that the Outlaw Country cruise, or which cruise were you guys on?
Yeah, it was the Outlaw Country cruise.
Okay.
This is our 4th year doing it. So.
Yeah, we've had a lot of guests that did that cruise, and from what I understand, it's a pretty good time.
Oh, it's a blast. Yeah, it's, some people that have never been on a cruise, they're just like, oh, it doesn't seem like it'd be that much fun. It is so much fun. And not only because we get to play, but my family gets to come too, and they have a good time, and it's kind of like their payback for me being on the road the rest of the year. They get to come on the cruise and see all the great bands that are playing, and just the people are there to enjoy themselves and really listen to music. So everybody has a really good time, but it never gets out of hand.
Yeah, so for sure.
It's a blast. And this year they stopped twice. They made 2 stops instead of 1. So it was a little bit of a longer cruise, and it was a good time. I always look forward to that.
Well, cool, man. Yeah. Well, if you have the flu next year, I'll gladly fill in for you, or something like that. You think Jesse would be down with that?
I'm sure.
Okay. Well,
why not?
I will put it on my calendar then. Sorry to hear of your pending illness. Well, cool, man. Well, as tradition dictates here on the Drum Shuffle, let's dive back a few years here. Tell everybody how you ended up behind a drum set and where you're from, and all the good details that led you up to today.
Sure. Well, I am a 2nd-generation drummer. My dad was a drummer. And I grew up in eastern Pennsylvania, kind of outside of Scranton. Now everybody knows where Scranton is. It used to be nobody knew at all, but ever since Biden and The Office, everybody kind of has an idea now where Scranton is. So that's where I grew up. My dad was a drummer. He played drums in Vietnam. He took his drums to Korea during the war, played in all kinds of bands, from rock and roll bands to soul bands to polka bands. His last band was a polka outfit called PAL, and he was the drummer and the singer. So it's kind of born into it. I always was pretty fascinated with drums. I watched my dad play at weddings, and I remember being really young. It's one of my earliest memories of watching the hi-hat opening and closing, and I could not figure out how it was doing it. So I was completely fascinated. I just spent like an hour just staring at it, like, how is it doing that? So as my dad got older, he kind of stopped playing, and he kind of put his drums up, and I would ask him periodically, like, hey man, could you show me how to play drums? And he always said no. And I got really frustrated, like, why is he always saying no? So my sister started dating a drummer when I was, I don't know, about 11 or so.
God, that had to drive your dad crazy.
Yeah, probably. I'm sure he wasn't thrilled about it, but so she would take me over, and he was the first guy to actually sit me down and kind of show me how the layout goes. And I remember very vividly where he sat me down, and he's like, okay, this is the bass drum pedal, this is the hi-hat pedal. He's like, think of like the gas and the brake. He's like, so put your foot on the gas. I looked at him, I'm like, I don't drive. So, and he's like, oh, yeah, sorry. So he showed me the basics, and then I went home, and I went immediately up in the attic where I knew there was my oldest brother had a drum kit up there. I'm the youngest of 7. So my oldest brother had played drums once back in the early 70s, and I guess he didn't stick with it. So the drum set ended up in the attic. So I went in and I pulled it down and set it up, and I started playing. And after a couple weeks, my dad came around. He's like, all right, it seems like you're serious. He's like, I'll show you whatever you want. He just kind of wanted, I guess because my oldest brother said that he wanted a drum kit, and he bought one, and he lasted like a month on it. When I came around, 6 kids later, and said, hey, I want to play drums, he's like, yeah, I've been through this before.
Yeah.
So he was like, that's why he said no initially. He wanted to see if I was serious. So after that, he was more than happy to show me anything. But he was very adamant about not taking lessons.
Okay.
It was a weird thing. He's very old school, and he felt that if you took lessons, you just took on the style of the guy teaching you.
Yeah.
It was more important to find your own voice in a way. So I really understand where he was coming from, and I wish that though I had some formal lessons, but I'm completely self-taught that way. I used to sit in with the school band. I would play drums with them because the guys they had weren't very good, and they would ask me to join, but I refused to do it because I don't know, I guess I thought it was too cool. But I wish I had, honestly, just for a little bit of that structure. But so I ended up just kind of completely self-teaching, sitting down in the, woodshedding on my favorite records of the day and just playing along with them in the basement, driving the neighborhood crazy.
Yeah.
I think we all had that first song we learned, and I remember playing it like 20 times a day until literally one of my neighbors came over. He was like, "Hey man, it sounds great. Can you learn another song, please?"
That's hilarious. Well, I mean, that's...
Yeah, I guess I should.
That's the same story as me. I mean, I never had really any formal lessons, and I think a good drum instructor is invaluable, but I say that now after, 25, 26 years of playing the instrument, where I have trouble, and this is actually a question to you, but where I have trouble now is if it's something that's highly technical and very, rudiment based. I mean, I never really got past, paradiddles, to be perfectly honest.
Sure.
I singles, doubles, paradiddles, if it's something that's really, really technical and requires you to get deep into technique, that's where I kind of get lost, and it takes me twice as long to learn it as it would somebody else. Do you have a similar experience?
Yes, there was definitely a point, probably I would say it was around the early 2000s. It was the first time I started working at a drum shop. I'd worked restaurants, the typical, I was a musician and a line cook.
Yeah.
And then I finally got my first job working at a drum store, and I got to really hang out with some of the teachers there, and they had some really amazing teachers at the store. This was in Pittsburgh when I moved to Pittsburgh. And I started feeling really bad about myself. I felt like I should be, to know this stuff, I should know all the different rudiments. I felt like I really missed out for not having taken lessons. And I actually did try to sit down. I found kind of an older jazz guy and tried to sit down. I'm going to really knuckle down and take some lessons. And it honestly just didn't take. It didn't work for me. It's just not the way I'm programmed to play. And over time, I realized it's just a different way of doing things. Some people prefer the more formative route, and some people just prefer to learn it on their own. And I finally became comfortable with that. It took a little bit of time, but I realized that I'm more of a groove guy. I realized that all the people that I truly love and idolize are more groove-oriented and not chops-oriented.
Right.
I'm not a huge Weckl fan and, people like that. It's impressive what they do, and I could really appreciate what they do, but it's just not my thing. I'm more of a Levon Helms, Steve Jordan, Bunny Carlos kind of guy.
Right on.
I just love the feeling of a good sinking groove. So yeah, there's been times, in cover gigs where I've had to learn something. I know a good example. I played with a band that wanted to play 7 Days by Sting. Vinnie Colaiuta.
Yeah.
Is that in 5 or 6? I forget. It's a complicated song, and definitely it was intimidating because it's just not my usual bag. It's outside my realm of comfort. But I was like, okay, I need to sit down and actually work at this kind of thing. And over time, I got it. I'm sure some other guys would get it much quicker. But I felt a really big sense of accomplishment when I finally did get it down and played it with them. And it's like, yeah, so I can do that stuff. It just might take a little extra effort.
Yeah.
But, I don't read music. I don't write music. It's just all by ear. And that's how it's always been for me.
Well, it makes me feel a whole lot better knowing that I might still be able to make a living knowing absolutely nothing about the instrument I've chosen to play.
I realized, I remember sitting down with that older teacher, and I remember telling him, I'm like, I want to know everything there is to know about the drums. And at the time I was thinking in the terms of rudiments and that kind of stuff. But over time I kind of realized that I'm more interested in the actual physicalness of the drum. Like I love taking drums apart, seeing how they tick. The first thing I do when I get a kit, no matter what condition it is, I completely take it apart.
Right.
Every lug, every spring, every swivel nut, clean every bit of it because I want to know everything there is to know about the instrument, knowing about woods and bearing edges. At that time, I didn't know any of that. And then I realized this is way more interesting to me.
Right. How
the drum is made, how it makes the sounds it makes, depending on the heads and the tuning and the wood and all those characteristics, and not so much the technical side. It's more feel for me than it is flashy stuff. It's just flash was never my thing. I love the feel of falling into a pocket and just kind of anchoring the band down and watching people dance. To me, once I see people moving, I know I'm doing my job right.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I think your current gig, we talked at the very beginning about you just getting back from Europe. You've been playing with Jesse Dayton now for how many years?
A little over 4 years.
Okay. And, if our listeners aren't familiar with Jesse, first of all, get familiar with Jesse. Just fantastic, great music. And I don't just say that, just because you're my guest here. I listen to Outlaw Country on Sirius XM. That's one of the channels that I'm dialed into a lot when I'm out driving around. Love Americana music, and Jesse is bringing the business, and it's just really good music. But that's kind of the role you play in his songs, is you're driving that pocket, right?
For sure. And we're at, the current iteration of the band is a three-piece. He's gone through his phases where he's had steel player, maybe a keyboard player, but a few years ago, we kind of pulled it back to just a three-piece. And, when it's that open, you have to really kind of keep it pulled together and filled in, So and I really love playing a three-piece because it just, it takes the right three guys, of course. But
yeah. Well, and you're playing with an upright bass player too, right? I mean, it's not electric bass, correct?
Well, he plays both.
Okay.
Some songs he plays upright, and some songs he plays electric, just depending on the song. Because some of this stuff is definitely of a more rock nature, and then we can also play some real classic George Jones era country stuff. If we need to do that, depending on the gig. So he can handle both sides of that equation. So between the three of us, we can cover a lot of ground sonically, and that's what's great about three pieces, is that it's very open for that kind of thing.
Well, and it makes the drummer and the bass player, I use the phrase haul the mail all the time. When you're in a three-piece, your rhythm section has to haul the mail. You got to get your job done. Otherwise, it all just falls apart.
Right. And it can't just be, just like a bass player who's just like hitting quarter notes. Like there's got to be something that fills it in, but you have to be very mindful of where the groove is.
Right.
Because if somebody flips, it's very obvious. You don't have somebody else in there covering it up. So it definitely leads you to be a lot more in the game, but it also gives you more leeway to kind of experiment a little bit more and kind of go in some other places because it's just three people. So
yeah, for sure.
It's exciting. It's definitely, it's fun. It's a good group of guys. And as far as Jesse goes, for people listening, Jesse Dayton might not be a name that people recognize, but they will certainly recognize the people he's played with.
Oh, yeah.
Because he's played with everybody from Waylon Jennings to Rob Zombie and X. So he's one of those guys that spent a lot of his 20s and early 30s playing with some major names, and now he's just kind of, establishing his own name.
Well, he's doing a darn good job of it. I mean, I don't just say it because you're on here, but I am a fan of the music. So if you don't know who Jesse is, or you don't have any of the records, go buy one, is what I'm telling you. You won't regret it. For sure. And there's a lot to buy. I think we're up to 10 records that he has out now. So yeah, he's very prolific at his songwriting, and so I mean, Definitely check it out. Now, of course, I've completely screwed up the entire interview because we're already in the current day, and we were trying to go chronologically.
Getting to the end.
Yeah. We'll start at the end and work our way back. But, I think what's cool about you, Kevin, is the fact that you've basically done everything there is to do when it comes to our chosen instrument. You've worked, as you said earlier, you've worked a retail drum shop. You run a backline company. You are doing, drum restoration and repair and, cutting bearing edges for folks. And obviously you're playing at a very high level as well. So when you sat down with your older jazz instructor and said, I want to know everything there is to know about the drums, it sounds like you've gotten there. So you can dissect that however you want, but you really do everything as it pertains to our instrument.
Yeah, well, when I went to college in the early 90s, I actually went for engineering. And I lasted about a year and a half before I realized I don't want to do this. This isn't like the idea of getting up every day and going and doing engineering. I know I'd make a lot of money, but I knew I'd be miserable.
Yeah, it's a lot of math.
Yeah, it's a lot of math, and all the classes were at like 7 a.m.
Right. And
I always think of Lewis Black, the comedian, talks about having early classes. And he's like, there's only so much you can learn through one bloodshot eye. And I agree, 100%.
Right.
So I was like, man, if it's this rough, just the classes, what's it going to be like when I'm actually doing it for a living? So I kind of pulled back, and I was like, I really want to work with the drums. I want to see what I can make out of it, much to my parents' chagrin. But they were like, okay, just see what he wants to do. And, I dove head first into, all the bands I could play with. I played with a lot of metal bands. I played with, I sang in a band once. I'm like, oh, this will be fun. I don't have to call drums. I'm just going to go in and be the singer. This is going to be great. And then the first show, like 5 seconds into the first song, I realized what a mistake I made because I'm used to being behind a drum set. And I did not let that microphone go. I had a death grip on it for 45 minutes. I was so terrified.
That's fantastic.
I felt so naked, as they say.
Yeah.
So, all these different bands. And that's when I started getting into, in the late 90s, I got into the whole, as they called it, the alt country movement. And realized that like, oh, you can take this classic country stuff that I grew up, with my dad listening to and the Replacements and, like old AC/DC and kind of jam it together and kind of get this really cool form that pulled all the stuff that I like into one little nugget. And so I did that for a while. And, the whole time I'm doing restaurant gigs, whatever it takes to pay the bills while I, pursue the instrument. And then I kind of fell into the whole music retail, and I realized I'm like, well, this is still making money with my love of music. So to me, it's like this all works. And then that led to going into the backline, the whole backline thing. And I was just like, man, my whole life revolves one way or the other around music and drums. I'm either getting a drum set ready to send out for somebody else to play, or I go home and I'm cutting a bearing edge for somebody's drums to get them to sound better, or I'm playing drums myself. So, in one form, it was very satisfying to know that, even if I didn't become a huge rock star like we always wanted to when we were 13, I managed to make a living and feed my family through, my love of music and the instrument. So,
and that's rewarding in and of itself. And I'm sure your dad told you, if you find something you love, you'll never work a day in your life kind of thing,
Sure. But, he wasn't thinking that when I told him I decided I wasn't going to go to college anymore to be an engineer.
Of course not, Well, but, your family dynamic, if you're the youngest of 7, they were like, well, we've got 6 others that, went to college, right?
That's true. By the time I came around, they were a lot more hands off. And
we'll let this one do whatever he wants.
Yeah, they're just like, whatever. They knew that once they cleared the hurdle of me, they were done.
That's so funny. Oh man, that's great. Well, so, I do want to talk a little bit about the backline stuff and kind of the restoration stuff that you do. For our listeners that may not be familiar, backline simply refers to rental gear. And a lot of these bands nowadays, especially, they don't tour the way we would traditionally think of touring, meaning getting on a bus and hauling all your gear all over the country. A lot of guys just fly into a city, their stuff is set up for them, they play the show, they get on a plane and fly back home. And a lot of groups are, literally doing shows like Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and that's it. They're back home on Sunday.
They call it like the Nashville thing, where you just Thursday, Friday, Saturday, maybe Sunday, and you're back home.
Right on.
Because live performance has become so important, when the whole, album sales just went down the toilet, and they can no longer really make money on selling music. Now, now live performance has become where people can make their money. So it's become, I think, a cheaper way for a lot of bands, especially, older bands that don't want to be on the road for 5 weeks, to just, literally just fly out. The venue will order the gear according to their specs and have it ready for them. They come and play, and they're on a plane back home. So it's become very commonplace. Plus all the festivals, festivals are huge now. And honestly, the company that I do some work for here in Atlanta provides all the gear for the Outlaw Country Cruise and all the boats that Six Man Cruises does, which is, I don't know, probably about 15 cruises now, because music cruises have become a huge thing
right
now. So it's a big business. And, there's several just in Atlanta. There's several backline companies. I've pretty much worked for all of them in one capacity or another. So it's an interesting business. And it's what I was doing when I met up with Jesse, and I just kind of had to pull back from it a bit when I started touring with Jesse. But when I'm home, I'll still do work for them. I prepped gear for the Outlaw Country Cruise that I ended up playing on just like 3 days after I packed all the gear. So I got there, I'm like, the sound guys, the production guys are setting things up. I'm like, here, let me fix this. I packed this drum kit, so I know exactly what needs to happen. They're like, oh, thanks. So it's kind of funny in a way.
Yeah, it is.
Last year, I actually played the Outlaw Country Cruise, got off, went directly to Texas to play a weekend's worth of shows, and then I flew directly to Miami to go work on the next cruise, which was Joe Bonamassa's cruise.
Okay.
So I spent a week working on one of the stages and teching one of the stages, and then I got back to Miami when it docked and flew right back to Texas and played some more shows with Jesse. So it makes for some interesting scheduling.
I'd imagine so. But when you've packed your own gear, the backline that you're going to be playing on one of these cruises, you can't complain about the backline gear being crappy, right?
Exactly.
Because if there's,
I can make sure that all the heads that I want and all the cymbals that I would like to play
are going
to go to the stages that I'm going to be playing at. So there's a little benefit to it.
Pick from the A crop of cymbals and heads. So
absolutely. Yeah, well, there's a benefit.
If there's one thing that is common amongst all working drummers, it's complaining about backline gear. I don't care who you are, and we all
I've spent some time, especially going over to Europe. I've had some crappy kits, and then I've been surprised and had some really cool kits. Like this last time we went to pick up the gear, and I got to actually walk around and look at all the kits they had, and and kind of talk the talk with them. I was like, hey, I do this stuff when I'm home. So, they had a vintage stainless steel Ludwig kit there.
Oh, wow.
Well, why can't I play that kit? Why did I get the recording custom?
Right. Yeah, for sure.
Or they had some really cool, like, Sonore stuff, because it's overseas. So it's much more common to see Paiste and Sonore and things like that. So, but, I've done tours on Pearl Exports.
Yeah.
And just, you make it work, with cymbals that sound like manhole covers.
Yeah, that's usually the issue, is the cymbals more so than the drums.
Definitely after the first tour overseas, I learned my lesson to bring my own cymbals.
Yeah, for sure.
You always want to try to pack as light as you can, but man, you can mess with tuning on a drum kit or change out heads or something, but man, if you get a crummy cymbal, you can't tune it.
That's right. It's either there or it's not. I mean,
exactly.
Well, so I find that just immensely interesting in that, you're working on a lot of kits, and I'm sure, the backline companies that are in Atlanta, if they're doing, all these different cruises, there's probably a primo selection of vintage gear to choose from as well, right?
Well, usually, yeah, but each company generally has, a vintage kit that they'll have like, here's our vintage kit. The company that I do work for, most of the time, actually, their vintage kit was one of mine that I sold to them.
Of course it is.
So anybody that wants to play a early 40s Slingerland Radio King, I'll tell you where to go.
Right.
So generally, the ones around here don't have a ton of that vintage stuff. Usually it's an upcharge if somebody wants to play it. I've actually rented out my kits. They've, subcontracted me. If somebody comes in and was like, hey, I want, a vintage kit in these sizes, they know they can contact me if they don't have it, and I'll probably have it. So I've rented out my kits for like Medeski, Martin, and Wood. I think just a year ago, one of my Ludwig kits went for Iggy Pop, which was really cool. I was like, take pictures of my kit with Iggy Pop around.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, I was excited about it. I had a show myself to play that night, so I couldn't go myself. But I'm like, I need photo proof.
Did you take out extra insurance before that gear? I'm just.
I was a little nervous, but the excitement of it was outweighed.
Yeah. But
there's not a ton of vintage stuff. Honestly, there's some. And, each company will have some, but, most of the stuff that's going out is, DW 9000 hardware, DW or Yamaha kit or, your typical stuff. And then a lot of companies will have some of the boutique stuff, like CNC and, some of those smaller companies too. So
right.
You can usually find what you need one way or the other.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've seen some of these, equipment riders and stuff, and, back in the day, when I was doing more out on the road, I owned a DW kit, and that's what I was playing most of the time. And you can always find that at a backline company. But I've seen some requests that's like, Yamaha recording custom or equivalent. Well, what does or equivalent mean when you're talking about a Yamaha recording custom? You know what I mean? Is it any Birch drum set? I don't know.
In my time, I've seen some silly stuff. I mean, and as a lesson for anybody out there who's, maybe putting together a rider, I always put like first choice, second choice, third choice.
Yeah.
And that really takes the guesswork out of it. So whenever you see those, you're like, okay, yeah, we can work with this. But one funny story was, and I don't remember who it was. It was kind of like a jazz supergroup from what I remember. Was renting some gear, and they were coming in to rehearse, and then they were going to, take the gear for the actual gig. And the guy wanted an 18-inch Pearl kick drum. Now, we had a Pearl kit with a lot of sizes, but we had every kick drum size available except for 18 because usually you just don't get a lot of requests for Pearl 18-inch kick drums. If somebody gets an 18, it's usually Gretsch or Yamaha or something like that.
Right.
So I was talking to my guy. I'm like, look, I said, I've got a black Pearl kit with the other sizes that he needs, and I've got a black Yamaha 18-inch kick drum or a 20-inch Pearl kick drum. Whatever is best for him. They're all the same colors, so no big deal. So he gets on the phone, he explains to him, and he comes back and he said that this drummer cannot emotionally or physically play a 20-inch kick drum. I said, emotionally?
What?
I don't even know what that means. I don't even know how to process that.
Oh man!
I don't know if that means he would go to play it and start crying. It was bizarre. It was a bizarre thing. So I forget how we ended up solving that. I think he just ended up using the Yamaha kick drum with pearl toms and pearl snare. So.
Yeah, I mean, most of these guys, when they do a backline kit, if there's an endorsement or something like that, that's why you see gaff tape on the logo head. You know, I mean, so that's some inside baseball for folks. When you see somebody on, I don't know, the Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon, and there's gaff tape on the front bass drum head, it's because they have a backline kit of a competing manufacturer. So
exactly, and they don't want to upset their company.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Well, so let's talk a little bit about, we kind of scratched the surface on the vintage stuff. You've got quite the collection, I know, and you don't have to give anything away that you don't want to, but when did the collecting of vintage drums bug bite you?
Oh, I can tell you exactly what it was at the time. So after I started playing, I told you I brought my brother's drum kit down from the attic, and that's what I learned on. And it was a 1971 Slingerland Modern Combo. I know exactly what it is now, but at the time it was just an old drum kit.
Right.
So on my 14th birthday, I got my first Pearl Export, and that was my drum kit that I played forever. Smoky chrome. I had 4 rack toms and 2 kick drums, and after a couple gigs, I realized, man, hauling this second kick drum is kind of a pain in the butt. So maybe I'll just go with one. So I played that Pearl Export forever, and my dad had long since stopped playing. He got arthritis in his hand, and it was kind of hard for him to play. So every time I would go home to visit, I would ask him, like, hey, kid's just sitting in the basement. Can I take it? He's like, nope. He was just like, absolutely not. I was like, okay, just asking because it's just sitting there. And I think his reservation was probably because when I was younger and dumber, his kit was a 1948 Slingerland Radio King, and it had all cast skin heads. And he played just one cymbal. He had this Vold Zildjian, I think 14-inch, just thin crash. And that was that, and a hi-hat is all he played. He didn't have a ride or crashes. He just had that one. And, I remember being a meathead and playing and breaking a drum head and be like, I'll just go grab one from Dad's kit, not realizing it's a calfskin head. And that's totally different than my pinstripe or whatever I had on there. So, of course, I just shredded right through that head. And, I have to come home, and he'd come home from work, and I'd be like, oh, sorry, I broke this head. And then, I started playing on his cymbal, and I ended up trashing that too, because I had no technique. This was the backfire of him not giving me lessons, right?
Yeah.
So, kind of bummed him out. And I'm sure that was a little penance that he wouldn't let me take the drum kit because of what I had done when I was a teenager. But this was many years later, and finally, the end of 97, I was getting ready to go home, and he's like, if you want to take that drum kit, go ahead and take it. Oh, cool. So, I threw it in the car, drove back to Pittsburgh, and I remember I spent New Year's Eve that year sitting on the floor, taking that thing apart and cleaning it, and got new heads on it, and like a month or two later, I played my first gig on it, and I went to do sound check. And, they're like, all right, give me the kick. And I just laid in that 24-inch kick drum with, it's the old Radio King, like mahogany with the thick reinforcement hoops on it. And it just sounded like the heavens parted when I hit that kick drum. Like literally that first hit, and I just immediately went like, this is the sound. I don't know what it is or why, but this sound is just what I'm looking for. It was very different than a Pearl Export.
Yeah, for sure.
I finished my sound check, and the sound booth was up some stairs away from the stage. And I watched the guy get up. I watched him walk out, walk all the way down the steps, walk onto the stage right up to me. And he's like, I'll give you $3,000 right now for this drum kit. I was like, well, I'm not selling it. He's like, I'm serious. He's like, this kit is amazing, and I want it right now. I'm like, no, it's personal, And every time I played there, he was like, you sure you don't want it? He's like, if I get that drum kit, he goes, I'm going to put it in a humidor. It's going to be sealed off. And but one thing my dad always taught me was that drums are not museum pieces. He's like, they're meant to be played.
That's right.
And to this day, I still, I've got a lot of vintage drums, but I have a whole thing that if I'm not playing one, then I shouldn't have it. So I always try to kind of cycle through all the drums that I have and make sure that they're all getting played. Because in the back of my head, I can hear him going like, nope, if you're not playing them, you shouldn't have them. So I've sold a lot of drums that I didn't necessarily want to, but I wasn't playing them. So I did feel like I should have them, that somebody else should be playing them.
Well,
that's where that bug started, that 42 or 48 Radio King. And that's what got me into like, why does this drum sound so much different than the Pearl drum kit I have? And so I had that kit, my Pearl, and I remember thinking, oh, I got 2 drum kits. It's going to be cool. I'll play them both. I never played that Pearl again.
Yeah.
Finally just got rid of it.
Yeah. Well, and look, I had a Pearl export kit. That was my first kit growing up. And,
I grew up in the 80s and 90s. You had a Pearl export kit.
That's exactly right. Because, they were everywhere. They owned MTV. So everybody wanted that, and it was very affordable and, all those things. But, and the Pearl export stuff, I think they called it Philippine mahogany, which is really just a fancy way of saying Luan.
Yes, exactly.
There is a difference between wood that has been off the tree, out of the ground for 60, 70 years. It's just the way it dries. Right. And, there's a million different scientific things that goes into it. But a vintage...
And I feel that another thing in that, too, because you could take the same material, like, DW makes a classic series, which is basically a recreation of the Radio King. And I've taken them apart and looked at them. It's very well done. The reinforcement rings, the mahogany, it all looks right. But it still sounds different because this vintage drum kit's been played for decades.
That's exactly right.
So all the vibrations going through that wood is what's really, to me, making the difference. You have the type of wood, the bearing edge, the tuning, all that stuff plays a part. But vibrations going through wood for decades is going to open up that sound. So there's, and that's what fascinates me with drums, just all the different things that come together. It's not like a guitar where it's like with the strings and these pickups, that's, where you're getting that electric guitar sound. It's not, there's not so many kind of random things. It's just like with tuning. People come in and to the store and just, it's always a puzzle on how to tune a drum. And I always find it fascinating. It's wide open. It's whatever you want it to be, and to me that's fascinating, but it's frustrating to most other people.
Oh, yeah.
Because you don't plug it into a tuner and say, okay, you're in tune.
That's right. Well, I think, you bring up a really good point about guitars. Guitarists are notoriously picky about, well, I'm going to switch out this pickup for this other pickup, and, they've got their pedals and all that different stuff. For us, it's a little bit harder to dial in the sound that we hear in our brain. It's
more ambiguous. Yeah.
It is. And, sometimes, and there's nothing that I love more than, popping in a pawn shop, and every now and then you'll find something that's, kind of gold in there. But, you tap on a snare drum and you go, this one's it. That's what I've been. There's something about it and you don't know what it is. You can't quantify it. You just know it when you hear it.
Yeah, and I think that's why it has always driven me to be like, I want to tear this drum apart, see what makes it tick, and like, it just I find it endlessly fascinating. But yeah, it is even better when there's a story behind the drum kit. And I've been really fortunate that I've got a lot of drum kits that have these really cool and interesting stories behind them. And if you ever talk to Josh. And I won't give too much away about our secret group, but me and Josh have a very good friend named Davis, and the three of us are kind of like three musketeers. And my friend Davis always gives me stuff about how lucky I am to have lucked into all these really good deals on drum kits. You just keep your eyes open, you'll eventually find them. It's harder these days with the advent of eBay and Reverb and all that stuff. It's not like you can find stuff at a garage sale all the time, but it still happens. And when it does, it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, for sure.
When you have a good history and like a story, and then, you really kind of get to know the drum, and I'm immediately like, what heads am I going to put on this? And what is it going to sound like? There's just so many different things that are going to come together to make this sound. So, I get excited about drums.
Yeah, well, I do too. And, still on my bucket list, I've been, searching for, late 60s, early 70s Ludwig psychedelic red kit that is still in good shape. And, the green always fades out. If any sunlight hits that finish whatsoever, the green turns to kind of a yellowy gold color. And it's just really hard to find them that still look brand new. And I did find a kit once that looked right. Everything was great about it, but it sounded like poop. I mean, it was not a good classic Ludwig kit. It didn't sound right.
It's like I always say is people think that a vintage drum kit, immediately because it's vintage, it's going to sound awesome. And it's not the case, because back then it was very handmade.
Yeah.
And especially in the 60s when Ringo hit and they were pumping out, working 3 shifts at Ludwig and just kicking out drum kits, there was a lot of green wood going into those kits. And I've heard some dogs, and that's part of the excitement to me too, is I get a kit and I bring it home and I tear it apart. I'm like, I'm doing all this work. It'll take sometimes like a week to really take it apart like I like to do. And I soak all the parts for 3 days to get all the grime and grit off of it, and clean everything and reassemble it. And I'm like, after all this work, it could sound like crap.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the gamble and kind of the excitement about it.
Right. Yeah. And every now and then you strike gold. Now, let me ask you this, since you're a vintage guy, like if you buy a kit and, one of the lug casings is just beyond repair, do you replace it with Periodcorrect stuff?
That is definitely towards more in the beginning of my collecting phase. I was very adamant about that kind of thing. And then over time, especially when you have a kid and money becomes tighter, there's times where I'm like, I could wait to find, this part, or I could just find a modern representation of it so I could at least play the drum.
Right.
So I've laxed a little bit on it. I do have some rules. Like if I recover a drum kit, it has to be recovered in a color that was offered in that year.
Okay.
Like I'm not going to take a pearl kit and wrap it in mod orange. To me, it's just not right. And that's just something I learned. There's a guy named Jack Lawton who has Lawton Drum Company in Pennsylvania. And he was the guy who first put me on this path of working on drums and how it works. And he's kind of the sage master of all the guys that work on drums or vintage fanatics. If you mention Jack Lawton, they'll know exactly what you're talking about.
Oh, yeah.
But he's kind of the guy that drilled that into me. He's like, stick with the colors that they offered. That's, I still kind of rely on that, but I've laxed a little bit on making sure that, because the parts get really expensive.
Well, yeah, especially if it's hard to find.
Years ago. Yeah. Now it's becoming more rare and people are really charging an arm and leg for stuff. So, I definitely don't like drilling extra holes for things. I'll find a way to do it without having to drill extra holes, and I'll keep the finish, something that was period correct. But other than that, with Slingerland, that's what's nice about Ludwig, is Ludwig makes parts that are exactly the same as they made.
Yeah, they've never changed anything.
Yeah, which is awesome, and even if you want to change, like I have a Ludwig standard kit, but if I want to make classic lugs on it, the whole spacing is exactly the same.
Right.
So that's a really good thing that Ludwig does awesome. Sling-On, there's a lot of reproduction Sling-On hardware out there that's really good. So, I've used some of it, and with the understanding of like, I come across some period correct stuff, I'll flip it out. But to me, it's more important that I get to play this drum kit than to hold off until I get everything to be, exactly what it should be. So.
Yeah, for sure. Well, one of my things that I did here just recently, my mom passed last year, and I sent my Black Beauty, my 6.5 by 14 Black Beauty. I had always wanted one engraved by the great John Aldridge. And
course.
Yeah, I got a hold of John. He was like, of course I'll do it. He was like, what do you want? And I said, well, this is going to be kind of a tribute to my mom. I want her name, her date of birth, her date of death on there. Other than that, make it look nice. And so he engraved it and sent it back to me. And of course I was showing it off to, all my drummer friends and on some of the forums, and people were like, are you going to play it? I was like, of course I'm going to play it. It's a tool.
Absolutely.
Of course, why would I just put it in a case? I own a drum that was owned by John Bonham. Now, do I tour with that? No. Do I take it to the studio and whack it occasionally? You betcha.
Sure.
Why would you not?
Drum, like I said, drums are meant to be played.
Yeah. I find it interesting that some guys are really purists. So I had to ask you where you fall on that spectrum,
And I can understand guys being purists, and if I could afford to be a purist, I probably would. But it just gets so expensive, and at some point, I have to make a concession. You're like, is it more important for me to get to play this drum, or more important for me to be 100% period correct? To me, as long as I'm not defiling it with a drill, and sticking a pearl mount on a vintage Gretsch kit or something like that, and and color wise, it kind of all makes sense. I could slide on some other stuff.
Absolutely.
To me, it's more important that I get to play this drum. I want to hear what it sounds like. I want to hear what it sounds like in the context of a band. So, that's how it is for me.
Well,
I'd love to see that Black Beauty. That sounds amazing.
Well, it's awesome. I'll text you some pictures when we get done here. It's really cool. And John's just a sweetheart of a guy. I'm sure you've had dealings with him.
I've always heard so.
Yeah.
But I just can't. The way he does that is so labor intensive, and he does it for so many companies.
Yes, he does.
I continue to see him on it. Man, he just must engrave all day long, and he does it old school.
Yeah.
So it's his hands, at the end of the night, he must just soak them in ice buckets or something.
Well, and he's out on the road teching for Brian Hitt of REO Speedwagon,
right.
So when he's not on the road, when they have a break and their tour routing, they typically do a couple weeks, 3 weeks, and then they'll have a week or two off. He goes home and engraves all day, until dinner time. And he has dinner with his wife every night, and then he engraves some more. And, he's to the point now, though, where he's got it down to a science. He really does, and he can just mow through them. But it's amazing to me that he keeps up with the volume of work that he does. And it's just...
It's him and no one else. There's I've never heard of anybody else. It's like, here's second in line for engraving. It's just John Aldridge.
That's right.
I'm sure there's guys out there that do it, but I've never heard of them. It's just, if I see something engraved, I immediately am like, oh, John Aldridge probably did that.
That's for the most part. Yes. There are others out there, but he's the gold standard when it comes to that stuff.
And he is.
Well, so that kind of brings me to my next question for you. When you're out on the road with Jesse, if you're not using backline gear, do you rotate some of your vintage stuff to take out on the road with Jesse, or what are you playing out on the road, I guess?
Good question. So when I first started playing with Jesse, he was temporarily living in Atlanta. It was just a temporary thing, and that's how I met him. And actually, partially through Josh Touchin. True story.
Uh-oh.
That's how I met Jesse.
There he is. The devil appears.
He's just always there, isn't he?
He is.
Just waiting in the wings.
Hi, Josh. We love you.
Love you, boy. So, so when we were starting tours, we were starting in Atlanta, and the bass player was living in Texas, so he would fly out to meet us, and we would drive out. So at that point, I was just taking, whatever I wanted to take for that run. And I've got a mid-'70s Blue Agate kit, Slingerland, that is kind of my go-to. It just works in every room I've ever put it in. Some kits just function well in certain rooms, and other rooms are like, but this kit works everywhere. I've used that. I've taken out my Ludwig Vistelite. I've taken out, I have a mid-'90s Slingerland, made in Nashville when Gibson first bought Slingerland.
Yeah, the Sam Bacco era.
Exactly. And guess who I bought that from? Josh Touchin.
Yeah, of course.
So I would take out those kits, and then Jesse moved back to Austin. So now the tours were starting from Texas, and I was flying out to meet them. And it dawned on me one day we're on the road. I'm like, oh, geez, when he goes, I'm like, either I gotta like send one of my vintage kits to sit in Texas when we're not playing, or I've got to figure out something else. Like the idea of one of my vintage kits just languishing in Austin, 14 hours away from me in between tours, just was a little too much to bear. So here's a running theme. Guess who I called?
Yeah, of course.
Touchin.
Yeah.
And at the time, Josh was at Natal.
Yeah.
And I explained it to him, and he's like, all right, man, you're an artist now. What do you need? And I was
the easiest endorsement application ever.
It was. I actually was like, is there paperwork for me to fill out? And, it's like, we'll get it. Don't worry about it. Because that's just how Josh is. He's just the nicest person on the planet. So at the time, they just come out with the Cafe Racer stuff. And I was like, well, I just want the vintage sizes. I want 14 to 24, 9 by 13, 16 by 16. He's like, sure, get it done. And, a month or two later, it showed up. And that is my road kit. And, man, it sounds great. It's a kit that I don't mind if the opening band plays. It's not one of my vintage pieces that I'll worry about somebody hand-fisting. Worst case scenario, something breaks, I can get a replacement for it.
Right.
So, but it sounds really, really good. We just recorded a covers record, and I used that exclusively on it, and it sounds amazing. Jesse even mentioned on this last tour, he's like, this is the best kick drum sound I've ever had on any record I've ever done. So it's good stuff and solid, and, so that's currently my touring kit. And then all my vintage stuff gets to sit with me so I can go out in the garage and look at it every night and smile.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome, man.
I can go out and count all my kits and make sure they're all there.
Well, don't we all do that? I mean, really, occasionally.
If we're going to be honest with ourselves, we all do that.
Yes, we all do that. It's kind of like, I've got buddies that are really great fishermen, and they open up their tackle box in the middle of December, January when they're not fishing, and they count their lures. And it's like, it's just that connection to it. It's just around the corner.
Exact
Yeah.
Same exact thing.
It's exactly like that. So, well, cool, man. Well, listen, I want to be respectful of your time. We've barely scratched the surface, so we've got to have you back. There's just so much that you and I could talk about, and hopefully it's entertaining for our listeners, to hear Jamie and Kevin geek out on drums for an hour. As is the tradition on the Drum Shuffle, we got to ask you for a good piece of advice. What would you offer up to other drummers, other musicians?
Well, see, because I'm a listener to the show, I knew this question was coming. And I thought about it. And I was like, I know he's going to ask me about advice. And honestly, I narrowed it down to 3 pieces of advice.
Okay.
If you don't mind.
No, man, this is your show, brother.
The first one was one that my dad gave me when I first started playing. Once he realized I was serious, and he came in, I remember him sitting me down. He's like, all right, here's the deal. You're going to be the first one to show up and the last one to leave. And, you're going to be carrying the most stuff. And to this day, I know some drummers who, they're like, oh, this gig, it's not really an important gig. I'm just going to take a kick and a snare and one crash and hi-hat. And I don't abide by that. I bring my kit. If I'm going to be playing somewhere for 3 hours, I want to have my stuff. And, I've made that pact with myself. I'm not going to complain about how much stuff I have to carry. And then every now and again, I'll get a bass player complaining about how much they have to carry. And I'm like, are you serious? You see all the stuff I have to carry? But in that whole thing, he's like, if you make a mistake, don't stop playing. And to me, that was one of the first pieces of advice that I found really helpful, because it's, it could be an inclination to be like, oh, I messed that up, let's start over. But to this day, if something goes wrong, I just keep going, and I can hear that in my head, keep playing.
Yep.
Eventually it'll catch up, and if you make a mistake, just repeat it, and then it becomes part of the song. He's like, drums are the easiest thing to cover a mistake with. So that's my first piece of advice, is to never stop playing, even if something messes up. The second one I kind of learned when I was younger, kind of by accident, was, I spent a lot of time in the basement shedding the records and stuff. And I don't even know what led me to do it, but I started setting my kit up in all kinds of different configurations. I'd move the toms around and, really try to kind of play with it. And later on, I realized it really was beneficial. It made it much easier talking about backline. Sometimes you have to share a kit. It makes it a lot easier to kind of acclimate to something that's not your typical setup. So inadvertently, I really served myself well by doing that earlier on in the playing. And then the third one is a more recent thing, where I really probably playing with Jesse because it's a much more kind of swingier kind of style in the music that we play. And in the last few years, I've really kind of gravitated to kind of that Ringo by way of Bunny Carlos kind of swingy thing. And I've learned that kind of putting your body into it really helps with the motion, almost to the point where when I'm playing, I'm almost kind of dancing on my throne a little bit. Like I'm moving my whole body with it and not just my hands.
Yeah.
And to me, that really helps with the feel. And I think it really helps translate to me, it's like, well, if I can kind of dance to this on my throne, then the people out there can definitely dance to it,
Yeah,
so
for sure.
That's something kind of more recently that and I fell into that once again too. It just, over time, I kind of naturally I noticed my whole body was kind of moving with it. And that really helps with that kind of swingy feel. So there's my 3 pieces of advice.
Oh, all of them great pieces of advice. And to kind of expand on number 3, it took me 20 years of playing to realize that if I just lean back a little bit on my throne, I'm going to naturally kind of get behind the beat just a little bit. And if I lean forward, I'm going to be right up on top. You know what I mean? It's just like these little things.
There's definitely connection to the rest of your body.
Yeah.
To what you're doing that I never thought about, and up until the last 5 years of playing, I was really like, oh, I can actually feel the difference.
Yeah.
And it really, really helps. I just never really thought about, you're just always thinking about your feet and your hands. But, there's definitely more to it. Your whole body is really involved in playing drums. Another thing that I find fascinating about drums, because it's so about touch and the person's feel, because it's such a direct line from the person to the instrument. There's no electronics in between. So that direct relationship with the instrument, I find just endlessly fascinating. So yeah, if you ever want to come by, have me come back and we could talk for hours. Yeah,
we absolutely could.
And nothing I geek out more on than drums, especially vintage drums.
Well, we will absolutely make it a point to have you back real soon, because this has just been great. And I know everybody.
Josh Touchin's been on twice. I mean,
yeah,
I've got to be on twice.
Can't let Josh get ahead of you on the tally sheet. So, well,
love you, Josh.
We love you, Josh. But if I have you back a second time, you know what Josh is going to do? He's going to call me and he's going to be like, "Hey, man, Ludwig's releasing this super duper, limited edition kit. I got to come on and talk about it."
Just to head me off. Yeah. What we should really do, one of these days, we'll have me and Josh on at the same time.
Man,
there's the honey in the rock.
From your lips to God's ears. That's what we need to do. And we need to get the secret club, the triumvirate of the vintage guys, and we'll do a round table. So we've got it planned out.
You want to bring all 3 of us in? I'm telling you, the jokes will fly and it's going to get silly.
Okay,
but there'll be some good drum talk, I can tell you that.
I can see the listener mail flying in already as soon as people hear this. So, Kevin, brother, man.
That's called a teaser right there.
That's right. That's what we call a teaser in the biz. Kevin, brother, I can't thank you enough for taking time to come on. We'll have you back anytime. Everybody go out, check out Jesse Dayton. See Kevin, walk up to him after the show, introduce yourself. He's a great guy. He'll stand there and talk to you about vintage drums all night.
Absolutely.
All right. Kev, we'll talk to you real soon, brother.
Great. Thanks for having me on, and good talking to you.
All right. See you, man.
See ya.
Okay, everybody, that's going to wrap up episode 62 of the Drum Shuffle. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We just simply can't do this without each and every one of you listening to this show week after week. Special thanks go out to Kevin Charney for taking some time to come on. We just had a blast. I really enjoyed having Kevin on the show, and hopefully we'll have him back here sometime soon. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button on whatever platform you're using to listen in. We have some guests coming up here over the next few weeks that I promise you're not going to want to miss. Next week, I'm going to be joined by the great Peter Kogan. Peter has a new record out, just doing tons and tons of great work, and he has just all kinds of wonderful experience in the world of drumming. And hey, here's a bit of news coming up here in just a few weeks. The great Sean Pelton from Saturday Night Live and Live from Daryl's House fame. I recently caught up with Sean, so we're going to have that episode coming up here in just a few weeks. So you're not going to want to miss those. We love hearing from you throughout the week. Send us your emails to thedrumshufflepodcast@gmail.com. We do answer every single one of those. Our web address is thedrumshuffle.com, and you can find more information about me over at jamieeads.com. While you're there, check out all those social media links. Please follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. We do have some cool stuff that we put out throughout the week, and you can follow us on those channels as well. Again, thank you so much for tuning in. We really do appreciate it. So, until next time, may your heads stay strong and your sticks never break. Cheers, everybody.